we did a placement in university and where we went into the school setting, and we had a alumni who had graduated before us, who was in the teaching setting, the teaching career, and basically pulled me aside and said, this isn't the place for you, because now they want to put us in a box and we're very limited on what we can do, creatively. It's very tough to challenge kids to be better. It's different. It's not like what it was when you came through the system and you might be disappointed. So that was basically the crossroads. I was devastated because that's what I had set out. I wanted to pay it back by paying it forward and do the same thing and be that same inspiration and mentor to young people that we had the pleasure of having ourselves. So that wasn't in the cards. So we got into private business and we looked at the market and we saw, the closest thing to that was the personal training market. And it was unregulated at the time. Everyone was just throwing up a shingle saying that we're a personal trainer and not a very educated consumer.
From Coordinate Sport, it's the Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Matt Young, founder and CEO of FSQ Consulting. Matt has launched and grown multiple businesses in this fitness and sport industry. He is now sharing his experience with organizations across the world looking to improve their participant experience and sustainability. During the episode, we discuss Matt's early life and his approach to leading and scaling organizations. Enjoy the show. Okay, I'm really excited to welcome Matt Young, the founder and partner at FSQ Consulting. FSQ are on a mission to drive culture change in sports, and Matt himself is an award-winning entrepreneur, consultant, and has worked with and continues to work with high-profile sports organizations such as the US Olympic Committee, PGA of America, and also Canada Soccer. So welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to have you on. Thanks for the early start for you out in Canada. I was talking off just before we started recording to you. 7 a.m., second meeting of the day, which is fantastic. Early riser, we'll probably get into that later on in terms of your habits and how you stay performing at such a high level. But how we normally kick off the show is just to look at trying to get to know you a little bit better, maybe look at your journey and where you've come from. So we always start with the question of what's your earliest sporting memory?
Well, I think the earliest sporting memory is getting up early and going to school to run around the track. Unfortunately, I had a dysfunctional family life, which lent itself to me not wanting to be at home. So going to the track and running around sport was kind of how I found and tripped over, confidence, the connection, and just basically improving my own self-esteem because I had mastered 10,000 hour rule probably by the time I was 14 years old. So that's probably the earliest memories of sport. And I loved it. It was something that I could do on my own. I had control over. It brought great joy, moving and being active, and just loved it. So
I don't dwell on it too much. I know you mentioned you had kind of a bit of a dysfunctional family life early on. And we've, on the show previously, we've talked to many of our guests around kind of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences that's kind of driven them in the future and can actually cause hold that trauma with you into the future and cause other issues. But in terms of how you cope with that, I guess, would you say sport was your kind of outlet for that at the time? And if you want to talk about it too much, but
yeah, no question. Sport was absolutely the conduit to self-actualization for me. It was, again, where I could meet other people that were like-minded. It was where I could perform. It was where I could be recognized for the talents and gifts that I did have. So it gave that confidence that one would normally get as a child from other places. That's where it came from for me. So no question, it was the ignition and spark that basically stemmed the journey that I'm still on and will continue to be on.
So I'm coming to you from the UK. Obviously, most of our listeners are in the UK. So it's really good to kind of hear about the differences in, I guess, approaches to sport in school from Canada to the US. How was it for you in terms of the focus on sport? And did you have any key role models, or is it something that's pushed over there? Or do you think there's a gap?
Yeah, I guess it's a now and then. I am that old. So back then, sport was an integral part. It was woven into the curriculum. You had your specialist physical education teachers who went to university and got their degrees and masters on how to teach and how to coach and how to lead young people. And
just on that one, Matt, are they coming in, the specialists? Are they specialists in the elementary or primary school side, or in secondary school only?
Yeah, back then it was both. So back then it was in the elementary.
Because that's different. So in the UK we only have that coming in at secondary level, like the specific teacher.
And it's interesting, James, because I feel like that's a miss, because why would you have the kids go through their entire elementary school system? That would be like, we're going to introduce the secondary math and English teachers and mathematicians and scientists only in secondary school. So you're going to have no base of knowledge in the elementary school system. But then when you turn a certain age where the expectation is, we're going to have the specialist then. That's too late. So what I'd like to see is, and what we need to see, especially coming out of a global pandemic, is we need to see those specialist teachers back in the elementary stages, back the earliest possible time we can connect with kids and support them in their experience of movement and activity, not just sports, movement, activity, and sports. That's really going to be the determining factor, because we know that those young ages are really the formative ages of creating habits and love for these things. So yeah, I'm with you on getting it down early, getting that in earlier. So in Canada, it used to be that way. It's not now. It's very similar. They're only introduced in the secondary school setting, and now they're not even specialist teachers in the secondary school setting. It's been left optional. Physical education is optional in a lot of high schools after a certain grade 10. And again, that's a miss as we focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic only as the only mechanisms for learning. We all know the mind-body connection. We all know the benefits of being healthy, but it's just not convenient. So back to my early childhood experiences, there was those people there. They were the ignition. They were the spark. I had a great high school physical education teacher who challenged me to be better, challenged me to be a better human, not just a better athlete. And he was someone I looked up to and respected. And he was the coach of the team, because a lot of phys ed teachers also coached back then. They don't now because of unions, and they can't do that. And the club systems that have come in and basically kind of lent to the bifurcation of physical education.
So I'm just curious, so who's coaching the teams then at the moment if the PE teachers aren't able to do that?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of times in the secondary school settings, you'll see coaches from outside of the school system come in. They have to have an education background, but they'll come outside of the secondary school system and coach. And or some of the secondary schools have just left it to the community clubs and coaches. Right. Okay. So those who can afford to take their kids after school to travel to the clubs get the benefit of quality daily physical education and sport, and those who can't afford it don't.
And this is, I'm probably going off topic a little bit, but in terms of how, because a lot of our listeners maybe own and operating those type of businesses, so outsource sport delivery organizations, etc. And I know they're working super hard to keep the quality and make sure that their staff are fully trained. And maybe because they are commercial, they need to have high standards. Otherwise, they're not going to be in business. But how do you feel about that in terms of, just from your own opinion, of an external organization going into the school to coach the team? Have you got any opinions on that? Or?
Yeah, well, I think if ideally, what's the school about? When you look at the vision and mission statements on school walls, is the development of the holistic human being of all students that come there, usually not just a certain socioeconomic demographic that can afford that. So I do think it should be school-based, but I do understand that teachers are asked to do a lot. So in the event that they can't do that or don't want to do that, I think outside sourcing coming into the school is the way to do it, provided that you're actually giving the opportunity to everybody. I think what the club system does when you take it outside of the school system is that you get only the people that can afford to go to those clubs and organizations that do, because they have to make a living to keep the lights on. Yeah. So they have to charge for that. If it's in the school system, the charge and the payment for playing sports comes down to a manageable level. So yeah, I think best case scenario, the physical education teachers and teachers are permitted to coach and want to coach and do coach in the school setting. Worst case scenario, we have external coaches come in, but I think leaving the school to go and experience that somewhere else is where we start to get that separation and bifurcation of socioeconomically. And I don't think that's positive for the kids in the school.
And your journey in school, so who were you in school? What character were you? Were you academic at all, or was it all sports? What was your kind of character back then?
I was the kid that was told to sit down, and couldn't stay seated. Live for recess, live for sport, live for after school sports, live for, the intramurals, just live for anything that was moving and active. Buckled down academically when it was time to and when I needed to as a means to an end. But basically movement, sport, and activity has been a real driver in my life.
And so your sports were track and field, right? And American football?
Well, we did everything. Yeah, we did everything. In university, it was American football and track and field, yes.
Okay, so you graduating from high school, going on to university, what did you kind of study at that point and take forward from there?
Yeah, well, I had such a great experience with movement and activity. I took kinesiology. I wanted to be a physical education teacher. I wanted to be that same spark and motivating force that I had.
Obviously didn't end up being a PE teacher. What was the kind of defining moment that you didn't go down that route in terms of becoming an educator or teacher at that point?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, James. So we did a placement in university, and where we went into the school setting, and we had a alumni who had graduated before us, who was in the teaching setting, the teaching career, and basically pulled me aside and said, this isn't the place for you, because now they want to put us in a box and we're very limited on what we can do, creatively. It's very tough to challenge kids to be better. It's different. It's not like what it was when you came through the system, and you might be disappointed. So that was basically the crossroads. I was devastated because that's what I had set out. I wanted to pay it back by paying it forward and do the same thing and be that same inspiration and mentor to young people that we had the pleasure of having ourselves. So that wasn't in the cards. So we got into private business, and we looked at the market, and we saw, the closest thing to that was the personal training market. And it was unregulated at the time. Everyone was just throwing up a shingle saying that we're a personal trainer, and not a very educated consumer. It was all about the girl or guy with the six packs. Since they have a six pack, they must be the best. And we came in and basically transformed that whole industry to be consumer centric. So it was all about the consumer, and it wasn't about losing 10 pounds or getting a bigger chest and bicep. Our whole X factor was about, what have you always wanted to do from a physical fitness standpoint that you've never tried? And what have you always wanted to do from a physical fitness and movement and activity standpoint that you don't think you're capable of doing? Once we got that answer, we put the wheels in motion and we took people through their own journeys. So it could be anything from a 5-kilometer run to a 10-kilometer run, marathon, half marathon, Berlin Marathon, Great Wall of China Marathon. We hiked in Iceland. Basically, if you came in and said you wanted to do something, we found 10 other people that wanted to do the same thing, and we combined it all. So
Love that. I'm guessing not many people came in and asked they wanted to go on the stepper or the treadmill for an hour a week.
No. It was all about us being a conduit to whatever your goals were, and we really prioritized the people. So things like an Ironman, you talk about that and you'd say, oh my God, I could never do that. It's so much time and I don't know what to do. But when you're doing it as a group, we would do it as a group with a focus being on that journey. We do a couple half Ironmans as a group where we travel together. You get to learn and know other people. We create community, and you'd complete the Ironman, and it wasn't about getting a world record time. It was about creating the journey. So we did that. It was awesome.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that approach is going to definitely bring a greater impact, right? So it's not just the physical or the aesthetic, it's like all those things you're talking about, massive challenges. So it's going to build the mental resilience and kind of impact their daily life, like whether they're, I don't know, they could take it on into their work or into their general lifestyle, and they get that commitment and dedication. I'm really interested in the model on that, because it's obviously, I know you've ended up franchising it, but in terms of the business model, that approach of being customer centric, like almost building the program around what the customers come in, I'm assuming that was difficult to predict revenue or know how that was going to play out versus just a standard gym membership, and we can count the numbers in and out, and new signups and churn and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, it was unique because it was innovative and it hadn't been done before. So we were by appointment only. We weren't a mass membership gym. Everyone that came had a trainer, and everyone came and had a trainer, had a purpose. So whether that was to take 4 strokes off your golf swing or to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, we were doing it. So what would happen was we started with one person, and then as you're sitting around the dinner table Friday night, what are you doing? Well, I'm getting prepared for a hike up Machu Picchu. What? And then, this is what I'm doing at my gym. And then other people would say, well, I want to do something like that. And that's really, the word of mouth was a big factor, and our consumers became our salespeople, because they would be talking people, and we would have them on the radio telling people about their journeys and where they come from. They were just regular people, regular men and women who decided to make a commitment and came to our business, and now they hiked Kilimanjaro or at the top of Machu Picchu or Grand Canyon or whatever it was.
So this is Innovative Fitness company name, right? And what year was this when you were kind of scaling that business?
We started in 1998 and scaled it, and we just sold in 2018. So we had a good 20-year run. We just sold before the pandemic, thank God.
And my point was that, I guess to start with, everything you're talking about is kind of built for the social media marketing age, right? If I'm saying I'm going to Kilimanjaro, like content, you got all your users, all your clients developing your content for you. So I'm guessing back then in 98, a different type of approach for marketing. It's all word of mouth back then.
Yeah, it was. You're right. It was entirely word of mouth. There was no social media, Twitter, Instagram, people taking a picture of themselves. We weren't really the demographic that did that anyway. They weren't on social media. They're not really on social media even now, even today. Kind of a more established private people. But yeah, absolutely. Did we dip down into people that weren't weren't in our club that wanted to come on the trips, absolutely. As long as they were prepared to put in the work and demonstrated that they could do it, they were welcome.
Obviously, Skilled Innovative as a franchise franchise operation. And was it there where at some point you've gone back into the younger age group, right, to work with younger kids in sport?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So basically, when we had kids of our own, we had 2 boys, and when we showed up at the sports system on the sports team, we found that it was exactly the same as the personal training business when we started. It was all about the celebrity coach with the celebrity parent, with their celebrity future Hall of Fame athlete, and the celebrity club. And we just said, there's more to sport than this. It's more than the standing, the score, and the schedules. That's not development. There's a great opportunity to develop culture, confidence, competence, character, and connection. We call those the 5 C's. And, it's just because a team beats another team 22-6 in a baseball game doesn't mean that coach is the better coach, doesn't mean that team's a better team. It just means that you've stacked a team in your community and you're creating chaos. So we kind of went in and said there's a different approach where sport is supposed to bring people together. That's the antithesis of that. That's the ethos of sport. It's about bringing people together. The Olympic rings aren't individual. They're overlapping. It's supposed to bring the best in the world together. And in your community setting, it's supposed to bring the community together. But what we were seeing was through all of the nonsense, sport was pulling the community apart. Everyone was in intellectual silos. You're competing against your neighbor. Your neighbor could afford to take your kid to the high performing club while you were at the regular club. So we started to see that and said, this is not what sport was meant to be. And we just try to implement bring the same business expertise, James, and experience that we had in our bricks and mortar business into the youth sports scene. That was our goal.
And I guess this is where having that we're going to talk about the operating system, but in terms of, there's a challenge, right? So you're working with, I'm assuming, volunteers predominantly in those clubs. So they don't have to be there if they don't want to, they're choosing to be there. How did that work? You're coming in disrupting, I'm assuming it was disrupting the status quo at that time. So what was the pushback initially?
It was as you would expect, particularly from the then leaders of the groups of sport. And I don't fault them because they didn't know what they didn't know. Nothing is left. You usually volunteer because your kid's in there, your kid's in the sport. So you follow them through their 4 or 5 years. When they're gone, you're gone. You get saddled with a whole bunch of policies and procedures that you have to follow. A lot of times it's not the volunteers with business experience. And I mean service business experience, because the business of sport is a business. And we keep having to remind people of that. Wherever there's a transaction of money for a product or service, you're running a business. And if you don't have business experience, if you don't have management experience, if you don't have people skills and experience, you're going to struggle to do good business, because there's going to be an expectation on the consumer side that's not being met on the organization side. And that's where we saw the biggest gap in sport across North America. It was being run by the least educated in terms of support, because there was no franchise operating system. There was no operating system that had been handed down from
with the governing bodies, etc. at the time. Was it just that wasn't on their radar? They just didn't work like that. It was just how it's always been, or were there some sports that was a bit more forward thinking, let's say, at the time?
There are the exceptions. There are some sports that are forward thinking, but I mean, we've traveled around the world. I've never seen an operating system come from a governing body. We call them national sport organizations here. I've never seen a national sport organization create an operating system outside of Canada Soccer that can actually be implemented at the grassroots level of sport. And that is your job as a governing body. It's not just to host the events and be the marketing company. That's one, and get eyeballs and visibility. That's one of your tasks. The other one is to create the operating system that makes it really easy for the grassroots level of sport to thrive, because that is where all of your initial experience, and that's the entry pathway to the high performance. We just want to turn around and say, most governing bodies just want to say, just give us your best performance. That's all we care about. Well, you're the most resourced, you're the most funded, you're the most visible, you have the most access to the latest science and data, and you have the most amount of capital. That's your job. Create the operating system that makes it easy for the grassroots level people to survive. Otherwise, you get the least educated in terms of support and the most self-interested people operating with no checks and balances at the entry point to the sport pyramid.
Do you think, I guess my question would be, why do you think it's like that? So, I mean, is it that, I know in the UK, there's a heavy focus on funding being related to, let's say in Olympic sports, it's related to medals, right? So if your sport can achieve this medal, you'll get more money. If you don't look like a medal prospect, we'll cut the funding. I guess you can't blame the governing bodies for going after the elite sport. But yeah, I guess, where does it come from, that lack of operating system, for a better word?
Well, I think it comes from a couple places. I think at number one, it comes from exactly what you've said, is that the focus is on money, medals, and membership. But using your membership, so in North America, a lot of the members, grassroots, Johnny and Jenny, are paying their membership fee to the national sport. A portion or all of it or some of it goes to that national sport organization or national governing body. So you're making money off the backs of your membership, but you're not giving anything back to them. You're taking that money to fund your job so that you can go sit at the Olympics, wear the lanyard, and have a great party. And come on, it's the worst kept secret. So why not? If we want that to be sustainable, hey, that's great. No one's criticizing you for doing that, but it stands to reason that the more people that you have in your funnel, the more high performers you're going to get that are going to meet those qualifying standards, and the more parties you can attend. So it's not an and or, it's an and. And I think that we have to ask ourselves that tough question, like, what is sport for? For a very small percentage, it's about elite performance and representing your country. For the vast majority, it's a dress rehearsal for real life. Yeah. And what's more important, having resilient, competent, confident, well-defined character people in your workplace as bosses, peers, mentors, partners, or having 2 gold medals in heptathlon? I mean, what benefits the society as a whole more? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. And I certainly have what I would do if I was the leader. I would be wanting to invest the most amount of tools, resources, and money that I could in the grassroots level of sport, because that's where we're going to have the most amount of victories, not just one winner. We're going to have multiple winners.
And so, just going back to the initial, I guess, not light bulb moment, or initial realization when you're taking your own children to sport, young age. At that point, was there a specific point when you thought, right, I'm going to do something about this, or the team can do something about this? And did you have a vision for what you were going to create, or how did it kind of manifest itself?
Yeah, well, it came out of. I wish I could say that I came and I saw and then I did, but that wasn't the case. I was asked to sit in on a soccer practice that we were having, and the coach was focused on his child at the expense of everybody. And basically, kids were running around; they weren't doing anything. It was not very well organized. And on one hand, and then on the other hand, there was a bunch of parents shouting instructions from the bleachers. We were inside a gymnasium to their kids, so each kid came with their own coach, which was the parent. And I just thought, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. So I stepped in to ask if I could help run the practice, and then ended up running that practice. And then everywhere we would show up, it was because we had the fitness experience and the education experience. That's why we knew what to do, because we had that experience. So basically every sport, whether it was soccer, whether it was hockey, whether it was lacrosse, baseball, football, flag football, we would coach. And we would coach and say, basically, there's 2 outcomes here. Number 1 outcome is that you have fun. And number 2 outcome is that we finish the season better than we started across the skills. So we want you to develop, number 1, and we want you to have fun, number 2. And those 2 had to happen. Everything else, if you do that, if you have fun and you're developing, it's a victory. So really being intentional with that, spelling it out, baselining kids about where they were, where they started at preseason, evaluating them again mid-season, and then following up at the end of the season to say, this is where you started, this is where you finished. Way to go.
And then how did that lead into, obviously, the work that you've done, obviously, with all the governing bodies and the large organizations, high profile organizations? What was the first step into that recognition? Was it there they saw what you were doing, or did you have to reach out?
Well, good question. So a couple things. Number 1, if you want to get anything across in sales, it's really 6 to 20 points of contact. I wish you could just go tell someone, hey, do this and you're going to have this experience. It doesn't work that way. They have to hear about it. So what we would do when we saw the sports system, when we saw the barriers, and people kept putting barriers in front of us, is, we created a documentary called The Cost of Winning. And we went around the world to the Norwegian Olympic ski jumping team. We went to the Ohio State University. We went to the New Zealand, and we just started asking questions. What are you seeing in sport? What's happening? And everywhere around the world, the answers were the same. It was all about the money and the medals and the membership. The focus was all about self-interest. It was all about, how can we monetize this? How can we sell the dream? It was pulling communities apart. It was pulling people apart. There wasn't alignment between national governing body and the school system, and the community sport. No alignment. So basically, that's where we found that there was a gap. And by doing what we were doing, which is focused on the development and fun process, we would always win because we were winning. So we won in terms of everyone doing that, but we would also win the championship. So everyone will go, well, what are you doing with your team? How come you always win in all these different sports? Our kids want to play for you. Because it was more than just about going out and beating the other team. It was about developing as a human. So it was about the human development. And people wanted that. People want that for their kids. Who cares if you're at the championship, if your kid's a ham sandwich? It doesn't matter. So let's create good people, good characters, good humans. So anyway, through all of this documentary, through the work that we did, through the discussions that we started having, through the tools that we started creating to fill the gaps and excuses, we got recognition, and someone from the United States Olympic Committee said, can you help us create an activation and accountability framework for our American development model? And we did. That led to the Norwegian Sport Federation saying, hey, listen, we've got the same problems, even though we just cleaned up at the last Winter Olympics. We've got some of the same problems coming into play. Can you come over and talk to some of our interested sport federations? We went to the Italian Sportif group. We went to the Liechtenstein Olympic Committee. We went to Stamps in Austria. We talked to the Austrian Olympic Ski Federation. So we did a lot of work nationally and internationally around this, and we kept just getting material. Here's someone who's doing this over there. Here's someone who's doing something good over there. Let's bring it all together and create an operating system for quality sport. And that's how that began.
So initially, was it a case of, I guess, just bringing together best practice from all over the world? And then when was it that you applied, or I guess you maybe doing it from the start, but you applied that commercial knowledge in terms of, because from myself looking in from the outside, it almost feels like a perfect fit, right? You've got franchise experience, controlling someone's experience on the essence of franchising, everything standardized. And when I turn up at this, everyone says McDonald's, but you're innovative. If I turn up at your gym in this location, it's going to be the same experience if I turn it up in another location.
Right.
And you know that in grassroots sports, that's wildly different across the board, depending on what club I go to. Was it, obviously, it must be a conscious decision, but bringing that commercialization in, or the commercial knowledge? I'm really interested in knowing how it all kind of came together into a formulated system.
Yeah, well, you get your first followers. So basically, you're right. As a franchisor, we had to create the operations manual. So the franchisor has two jobs: get as many eyeballs and visibility to the business as possible, number one. And number two, create the operating system that makes it as easy as possible for the franchisees to have success. Then there's a general manager. That's person number two. They have two jobs: any innovation, questions, issues, etc., that come from the franchisees, solve or take to the franchisor, number one. And number two, make sure that the franchisees are operating in compliance with the operating system. Then there's the franchisees. Provide the best service to the consumer possible. Job number one, responsibility number one. Number two, be in compliance with the operating system. So I've said operating system 3 times. Nowhere in sport is there an operating system. So everyone's just doing half of the required jobs. So to answer your question, when we got to there and said, here is an operating system, and by operating system, listen, we're not saying it's a one size fits all. We always give the analogy of building the house. There's 2 constants in building any house: the foundation and the framework. Foundation, cement or concrete, everywhere. Foundation is wood or steel. Framework, that's what we're providing. The furniture, fixtures, and finishings is all up to you. You're the coach. This is your special club. This is your thing. So we're not saying you have to do it this way and it's the only way. We're giving you the foundation and framework to do successful business in sport. We're teaching you about culture. So we've got 4 pillars. We've got the culture. What does that look like? How do you communicate it internally? How do you communicate it externally? How do you hold people accountable to quality culture? If you don't have a culture, you got nothing. That's basically the cement. It's the foundation. Second is the operations. So your marketing and communication strategy, your hiring strategy, your onboarding, your human capital. Who are you hiring? Who are you allowing in to your culture? How is that culture being disseminated through your club in terms of marketing and communication? So that's operations. Then you got reporting. So the money, the expenses, the key performance indicator, the lag performance indicator, the lead performance indicators, budgeting, forecasting. If you don't know how to do that and you stick your hand up and say, yeah, I'll do that. Who can, in Canada, we have AGMs at the end of every sport year, and people say, hey, who wants to be the treasurer? And James puts his hand up. Okay, James, you're the treasurer. Well, James, how do you know James even has any
exactly
financial?
Yeah, I think that's the same across the board. Yeah, over here as well.
Yeah. So the hand goes up and you're in that position with no guidance, no framework, no playbook. And then all of a sudden things go sideways. Of course they go sideways because there's been no guide. And then lastly is execution. So this all sounds great, but how do we actually execute it? You'll hear the word strategic planning thrown out there. We're doing strategic planning. We're doing strategic planning. And then 2 years later, we're back to doing strategic planning because we never executed anything in our first plan. So execution is where a lot of people fall down because there's no accountability. And like you said at the top of the conversation, they're all volunteers. A lot of us are volunteers. And the belief is, well, they're volunteering their time, so you can't hold them accountable. Our belief is just because you're a volunteer doesn't mean you can suck at what you do. If you're a volunteer, it's because you have and there's lots of great examples of great volunteer bases who have had that education, who do a fantastic job. So that's all about your culture. If you're going to be a volunteer here, here's the expectation of your volunteer. If it doesn't fit you, then sorry, see you later. Volunteering doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want because you're volunteering. It means that you've agreed to serve your community. That comes with a high degree of responsibility. And if you have a good culture, that will be reflected. So to answer your question a long way, that's what we've created. So we've created that sport operating system and then we go and support the organization. We've got not good, better, best. We've got minimum viable product, better, and best. Here's the minimum you should be doing. Here's the better, best. And then we go in and we support that organization to be sustainable on their own time after time after time. So that's what we've done.
In doing that, in kind of when you're deployed in or when you're engaged in a consulting capacity, what are the main challenges, the recurring challenges that you face in making that happen, in implementing the system? Such
a good question. Usually it comes at the board of directors. So usually we have, from what we've seen, a technical director, executive director, or president. That change needs to happen. They know the changes that need to happen, but now they've got to go in and they've got to get everyone else on board that has been doing something a totally different way. So before COVID, that was really difficult. Many people in sport think that they're the cat's ass. They've got a good ego, healthy ego, which is good. And, this is the 8 most dangerous words because that's the way we've always done things. Basically, that's the biggest challenge and barrier. But now they don't have a choice because we're coming out of a global pandemic. And we can't get away with not showing value to kids and parents because a lot of kids are doing other things now. They're not coming back to sport. A lot of parents in Canada have $15,000 of discretionary money now that they're not spending on their kids' hockey, that they've spent on something else. And their kid loves them because they're not getting yelled at. There's no pressure. And people are going, hey, this is great. And we're forced to, quite frankly, offer better value from the sport experiences.
If you look 5 years out, 10 years out, what's your kind of vision for the future in terms of rolling out the product across the globe?
I'll simplify that. It was on the Icelandic soccer team when they came fourth out of a country with 4,000 people, as many as possible, as long as possible, in the best environments possible. That should be the mission statement and vision of every single sport organization on this planet. Nothing more. If you do that, you're going to have your gold medals. You're going to have your podium finishes. You're going to have that. But this perpetual focus and pressure to win at all costs is basically cannibalizing the sport system in general. So our vision would be more countries focusing on the entry level to sport, the grassroots level, the foundation level. You build up that, you fortify that, you're going to take control and you're going to win by many more senses of the term than
it's sustainable. It's like a flywheel, I guess. Once you get that going, it's always coming through. You always got the conveyor belt, the talent coming through.
Great way to explain it.
Who's getting it right out there now? If you're gonna pick an example of a sports organization, governing body, country, who do you think's out there? I guess a beacon for other people to look at.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that because there are a lot of people doing good things too, and they should be recognized. Australia has done a really great job of baking sport activity and movement into lives of people, into their population. So they've done really well. Look where they sit at the Olympics, at any Olympics, especially the Summer Olympics. Look where they sit. They punch way above their weight in terms of population. New Zealand has done a really good job of connecting sport and school, and they focused on that for the last 5 years. It's been a 5-year endeavor to connect the communities in terms of sport and school because they become disconnected, and they're really trying to impart on people, listen, it's about the process, enjoy the journey. Stop putting so much emphasis on the outcome. The UK GAA is doing a great job of kind of operationalizing what they call the human development model. And they really want to use the science. They're doing a good job at using the science to steer the coaching and to steer the messaging that's going to different people. The PGA of America, I would suggest, is the organization that's doing the best job in North America in terms of realizing that it needs to be fun. And if it's not fun, you're not going to have people invest time in all of these sports, and really going right down to the coaching level and saying, this is how you coach character, confidence, competence. As you know, James, a lot of coaches focus on the physical and technical tactical competence, and that's it. They don't know how to foster connection and nurture and develop character in their young athletes. And the PGA is doing a great job of doing that, as is USA Hockey, as is USA Lacrosse. Canada Soccer has taken big strides forward in terms of a holistic athlete development model and club licensing, so that we're trying to get some consistency within how soccer is run in this country. So those are all examples. I'm sure there's many more, so I apologize if I'm leaving people out. Norway, who wins an Olympics and then goes and asks for consulting about, how to deal with some issues that haven't even shown up yet. So, the Scandinavian countries do a fantastic job of keeping sport local and avoiding the whole high performance and travel team trap. So there is a lot of great ideas and talent and expertise coming around the globe. It just hasn't really been consolidated into one, here's what we're doing and here are the results.
Any progress is good progress, right? Across the board. Just switching gears a little bit more personal in terms of your thought processes or your approach to business. Do you have any business, and I'm sure you do because you've definitely said some already, but any philosophies around how you go about how you approach business in general, leading an organization or even just consulting with an organization?
Yeah, I think two things that stand out. Number one, culture is king. It's understated. It's usually used as a buzzword. If you don't create the proper culture out of the gates, you're going to be in trouble. And it takes a long time to create a culture. A culture is a way of doing things. It's very simple. But, the minute you allow people to come in and erode that culture, especially if it's a positive culture, is the minute you're going to start putting out spot fires. And then you're going to be focused on policy and procedure. And you're just going to get buried in policy and procedure. So culture, number one. Number two is the servant leadership. So if you look at sports and look at what we teach kids, buy in, trust the system, be together, be one, believe. We don't do that at the administration level. So we're telling the kids and athletes to do something that as the administrators, we're not willing to do ourselves. Team before ourselves. We need to start doing that at the administrative level of sport, because that's the only way we're going to save sport. And again, a great example out of Australia was the merger of 30 different sport organizations and governing bodies into one. 11 boards with all of their board of directors were forced to go into one. I remember reading it because if you really believed, I think the quote went something to the effect of, if you really believe in the power and benefit of sport, you need to put it before yourself and your own interests. I thought that was just amazing. And they did that. And that's what's going to need to happen. We've gone way overboard on one side. We need to bring it back and dial it back. So that's number two. Number three would be surrounding yourself with the right people. If you haven't got the expertise, and that's ego. So check your ego, because if you haven't got the right expertise and you need help in an area, you need to have those people around the table. You need to have equal representation. Young participants need to see themselves in the representation at the board level, at the organizational level. They need to get inspired by that. So if you don't have that, you need to get that. If you don't have the right people making the decisions, if you don't have the right business expertise, you need to go and get that. You need to ask for help. Again, kind of dovetails on number two, the same thing we tell our athletes to do. We just don't do it on our own. So we need to start walking our talk, I guess would be number four. We need to start walking our quality sport talk.
Love that. I was joking a little bit earlier on, but in terms of daily routines, are you that guy who's up at 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. in the morning in the ice bath or wherever it is? Do you have any routines that you're using to get, obviously sport, you're going to probably carry some through from your competing and training days, but do you have any that you use now to be the best version of yourself in the business context? Yeah,
thanks for asking that question. Yeah, I do. Get up early and give 110%. That's it. Maximize every opportunity that you have. The reason I like getting up early is because there's less traffic. You can get to where you need to faster. I mean, I'm on the West Coast, so I can have a day that starts at 6 and ends at noon, and then start working with people here on the West Coast. So for me, it's all about getting after it and being disciplined and getting and establishing a positive routine. So get up, work, be active, walk the talk, just like I just said. That's one of the things. I mean, I'm not perfect and I've got obviously a lot of faults, but one of them isn't not walking the talk. I think you got to say what you're going to do and then do what you say.
Last question for me, and it's a bit of a reflective one. If you could go back to yourself as an early age, so if you could go back to yourself leaving university, let's say, and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it would be believe in yourself. I don't think socially, I just don't think we do enough for young people to help them believe in themselves. And that's where all this anxiety and doubt, you hear, no, you can't, on a way higher frequency than yes, you can and you should do it or try it. I think that that's the opportunity that you want young people to try that, because it's in a relatively supported environment. And we should be going and trying those things instead of no, don't, or you can't, or any of those words. So I think the advice that I would have is believe in yourself, because there was a lot of self-doubt that I had, and it's perpetuated by people who just kind of want to keep you down. So I think it's important for young people to go out and try and realize they're the future. Those are the people that are going to be our future. Please go out and make sure that you're in the best position for you, because that's going to be the best position for others.
Yeah, no, I love that. I thought of it like that in terms of hearing those words all the time as a kid. It's normally just out of protection. Parents might be saying, no, don't do that, don't stop. Whereas you have to have another approach to it. You can see it coming through later on. Really appreciative of your time, giving up so much of your time to us today. And I just want to say thank you for giving all those insights. Definitely a lot of gems in there. And we're going to link a lot of links in the show notes this week, but also the link to the video, the documentary. It's going to be a good one for all of our listeners to check out as well. So yeah, just want to say thanks a lot for your time, and it made a great episode.
Thank you. Appreciate you doing what you're doing.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.